Hey everyone, welcome to another modern deck tech. Yes, today another Temur Delver deck. Every other deck tech so far this year has been a Delver deck, and that's really for two main reasons. First of all, I am Delver Brews. I've played more Delver decks than any other deck, I guess, in Magic over the past many years. And of course, Delver is always going to be my base. And also, secondly, I know a lot of you are actually interested in Delver decks, whether because you are Delver players yourselves, or you just like Delver decks, you want to get into Delver. So Delver's Secrets is always going to be another creature I'm going to be coming back to, whether it's in a Temur shell, Sultai, Grixis, whatever it is. You're going to see Delver decks throughout the year, and it's always going to be true, even though I am going to be getting into other styles of decks, starting next week even. But, today we're going to be looking at Temur Pteramander Delver. Yes, I always change the middle word of the Delver deck just to kind of signify what variant of Delver I'm playing. And, before we get to the core, as we usually do, I just want to give you a little heads up or a little reminder. If you enjoy my content, hitting that subscribe button below on YouTube and hitting the notification bell really goes a long way. I mean, notifies you, obviously, when new content gets posted, but it also helps with the YouTube algorithm, helps others find my channel. So I would definitely appreciate you taking a few seconds and clicking that link, liking the video, sharing it on social media. That really helps me out a lot. I would really appreciate it. So let's get to the core. Well, Delver of Secrets is no real secret here. Of course, Delver is going to be in this deck. Of course, it's going to be a 4 of. A simple 1/1 that eventually flips to a 3/2. What I modified in this particular variant of Temur Delver, among other things, is I'm also playing Pteramander. Pteramander is a Salamander Drake. Yes, it is a Salamander Drake. We have a Salamander Drake in Magic. It has flying. It's also a 1/1 for 1. So another 1/1 flyer that dies to essentially everything under the sun. What I like about Pteramander is that for 7 colorless and a blue, which you will never pay, it has Adapt 4. And basically, this ability adds 4 +1/+1 counters on Pteramander, as long as it has no other +1/+1 counters. Keep that in mind as we go through this deck tech. And this ability costs 1 less to activate for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So, obviously, I've built this deck to ensure that we get as much instants and sorceries into the graveyard, as possible. Now, most Delver decks usually play between 26 and 30 at the highest instants and sorceries. Sometimes you could go higher. A lot of times Delver pilots go a bit lower. So obviously I'm maximizing instants and sorcerers in this deck, and you're going to be seeing that very soon. But Pteramander, honestly, I've had a lot of fun with it. Yes, right now we're playing a lot of burn decks, we're playing a lot of blitz decks, and they have plenty of burn spells to take out Pteramander, but honestly they have a lot of burn spells to take out Delver of Secrets as well. And that's really my thinking behind it. If you're swimming in a sea of burn and blitz decks, then maybe skip Pteramander. If it's not your thing. But it is a really fun and dangerous creature. Opponents definitely take a second when I cast it to read it and see what it does. And sometimes they kind of, I see the delays in guessing and them weighing which creature they need to remove. Are they going to get rid of Tarmogoyf, or are they going to get rid of Pteramander? It's not an easy decision to make, because Pteramander can become a 5/5 instantly whenever I want it to, and it becomes just a finisher. And the matches you're going to be seeing posted up today, and some of them, Pteramander just becomes a finisher, and it beats the opponent. The last 5 life is all gone through Pteramander damage. So Pteramander has really been fun to play. It's just a big creature when it needs to be, if it survives, and your opponents are going to have to waste a lot of removal getting rid of it, or else it just becomes really difficult and finishes games really quickly. I really love Pteramander. I had a lot of fun with it. The other creatures in this deck are not really surprising. We're playing 4 Tarmogoyfs, of course. Only playing 2 Hooting Mandrills. I obviously needed to make space for instants and sorceries, so I couldn't play too many Hooting Mandrills. Plus, Delve kind of is going to be taking away instants and sorceries from the graveyard, and we need them there to have that adaptability come down in terms of cost as quickly as possible. So Hooting Mandrills kind of makes sense to be only a 2 of in this instance, and that's perfectly fine because you already have Delver of Secrets as a 3/2 flyer. You have Pteramander that becomes eventually a 5/5 flyer, which is, insane. And of course you have Tarmogoyf. So you don't need too many other threats, at least in this type of shell. I think 2 Hooting Mandrills is perfectly fine. You could even get rid of Hooting Mandrills altogether and play some other creature if you want, or you can play more instants and sorceries if you feel okay with having 12 threats total. Alright, so the cantrips. 4 Serum Visions, nothing surprising there, but we're also playing 4 Thought Scour. Of course, now Thought Scour usually is there for Delve, so to be able to get Hooting Mandrills out turn 2 or as early as possible. In this case, it's doing other things, such as filling your graveyard with more instants and sorceries. To feed Pteramander if you really need to, get that adapt going as quickly as possible. I definitely have done it many times and it's worked wonders. Yeah, Thought Scour obviously makes sense to still be a 4 of in this type of shell. The removal, so I'm playing 4 Lightning Bolt and I am bringing back Tarfire here. It's my favorite. I always play Tarfire to make my Tarmogoyfs bigger, quicker because of the tribal instant that goes into the graveyard. But yeah, Tarfire, yeah, it's just a fun little removal spell, and you know what? Your opponents don't expect it. It is just shock, but getting a 5/6 Tarmogoyf early on in the game really makes a big difference in putting pressure on your opponent. They have to remove it through non-damage based removal, which is also important, and it could play a very good base in terms of you're attacking the air with little creatures. Your Tarmogoyf stays back to defend whatever offensive your opponent might throw at you next turn. So this is why Tarfire is here, helps remove more creatures, and also grows your Tarmogoyf at the same time. That's why I'm playing it. You don't need to. It's a flex spot for sure. You can play some other spells if you want to. Play more cantrips, but I think 2 Tarfires is not harmful. For a permission package, definitely playing 4 Force of Negations. Definitely important in this shell. I was actually also contemplating Disrupting Shoals, just to be even more protective of your weaker creatures, which are Pteramander and Delver Secrets, especially when Delver 6 is not flipped, and especially when Pteramander is just a 1/1. You want to keep them alive as much as possible, which is what this deck generally tries to do anyway. Keeps your creatures alive so that they can keep attacking and kill off your opponent. But I decided to not play Disrupting Shoal and just stick to 4 Force of Negations. We have 3 Mana Leaks and 4 Stubborn Denials, which, believe it or not, I didn't have too many issues having Stubborn Denial being active in terms of Ferocious being active when I'm casting it. Yes, it's Tarmogoyf that's mostly doing the Ferocious activation. We still have 2 Hooting Mandrills, which is relevant, and Pteramander becomes a 5/5. So when Pteramander becomes a 5/5, Stubborn Denial becomes Ferocious as well. So I still think it is correct to play 4 Stubborn Denials in this type of variant of Temur Delver. If you feel that that's not correct, you can swap those out, reduce the numbers, maybe take out 2 Stubborn Denials and add Disrupting Shoals. That's also possible, but I didn't in this case, at least for this deck tech. Another spell I've been trying out has been Snakeskin Veil. So I'm ashamed to say that I completely passed over this card when it was preview season for Kaldheim, and I saw another Delver player playing it in their deck list, and I saw it and I'm like, you know what? Snakeskin Veil is actually not bad to play in the main. Now, I am kind of going extreme here, playing 4, and that's just how I do it sometimes. At least for these deck techs, I go all out as much as I can, and I expect you as a pilot to take this deck tech and modify it to maybe a bit more to your taste. But I had no real issues playing 4 Snakeskin Veils. They come in very handy. We have Veil of Summer in the side, and that's obviously Veil of Summer is far better. It's there to protect your creatures, it's to stop your spells from being countered, it's to stop discard. The Veil of Summer comes in handy in a million different scenarios, but most of the time I'm bringing Veil of Summer in my mind to simply protect my creatures. Snakeskin Veil is doing that out of the box, and it's also pumping your creatures at the same time. I had a 4/3 Delver Secret, which felt really good because of Snakeskin Veil. I've also pumped my Tarmogoyfs up. I have pumped my Pteramander, and that's where I learned a very, very unfortunate lesson that I should have thought about before. But, if you use Snakeskin Veil on the Pteramander before you use Adapt, you can't use Adapt anymore, because Adapt's wording is very specific. If it has no +1/+1 counters on it, then you can adapt it. But the minute it has a +1/+1 counter on it, you can't adapt it. So Pteramander becomes a 2/2 and it stays a 2/2. So yeah, I learned that the very unfortunate way. I wasn't even paying attention to MTGO when it was warning me about that. Thought it was warning me about something else. So yeah, don't make that mistake. I still think it's okay playing 4 of here because protecting your Pteramander, making it a 2/2 might still be enough to win out the game, which I believe one of the matches shows that. So Snakeskin Veil, I had a lot of fun with it. Now as I build my future iterations of Temur Delver decks, Snakeskin Veil is somewhere in the 60, or at least I try to make it somewhere in the 60, because it's just it's another way to protect your creatures, in this case pump them up permanently and help win the game. And when your creatures are in the air, it's all the more powerful. The lands, nothing changes here. If you've seen my other Temur Delver decks, deck techs, this land base will look similar because it's exactly the same. And again, not much need to change here. If you're on a budget, obviously you could get rid of some fetches, run some Evolving Wilds or something instead. I don't recommend it. Temur Delver is a skill intensive deck. It's a tempo deck, and it's an expensive deck, as many modern decks are, unfortunately, because of those fetches. Of course, again, you can get rid of them. You can put in more fast lands. You can put in some cheaper fetch like alternatives like Evolving Wilds, and that'll probably do you okay. But if you want to play the most efficient version of this deck, you're gonna need those fetches. Sideboard, again, my disclaimer every time I showed the sideboard, it's really dependent on A, your playstyle, B, the meta, and C, just how you feel at any particular time. That's at least my experience. But this is the sideboard that I ended up with after all the games that I played with this variant of the Temur Delver. So 3 Veil of Summer, no shock. 2 of Braids, obviously no shock. Ceremonious Rejection I still think is valid. We're seeing Tron making Resurgent and other artifact decks making Resurgence, so Ceremonious Rejection is really important. Blood Moon, we can still play Blood Moon. We have a relatively Blood Moon proof mana base, so play Blood Moon. Still very, very relevant in this meta. Engineer Explosives, I always went back and forth with Engineer Explosives and other sweepers. I think I'm pretty much set on Engineer Explosives always being in my 3-color and 4-color decks. It's just really versatile. Yes, when you're playing it on 1, you're putting at risk your own creatures like Pteramander or Delver of Secrets, but oftentimes when you're going to pop Engineer Explosives, whatever you lose, it'll pale in comparison to what your opponent is losing. That's almost always my experience with it, so I think Engineer Explosives is perfectly fine, even if you're playing on 1, 2, or 3 CMC. Klothys. So normally Klothys is replaced with Huntmaster of the Fells, because that's just my creature, my go-to creature when it comes to life gain and mid-range grinding. But I've decided to switch to Klothys because I just want more sideboard space. And Klothys does a few things for me. It helps me target cards in graveyards, and that's important when I want to target cards in my opponent's graveyards and get rid of them. And it helps me gain life as well, which is also very important in the meta that we're currently seeing, with Blitz and Burn decks being in the top tiers. So I decided on 2 Klothys and 1 Grafdigger's Cage. I think this is fine. I'm still hedging against graveyard decks. If graveyard heavy decks fall out of favor, I might cut that Grafdigger's Cage and put something else in its place, but this is basically my current sideboard as I would play the deck today. Last but not least, the matchups. I know a lot of you enjoy this section, so let's get to it. Like many of my Temur Delver decks and my Delver decks in general, I'm usually not afraid of combo decks. Not any more than I would be with any other deck. I would say I'm relatively confident when I'm playing a combo deck. So whether it's spell-based combo decks like Storm, or land-based combo decks like their Titan decks, or whatever it may be, I'm okay. Now, Heliod, which arguably is a combo deck at the end of the day, it's tricky. Heliod decks are tricky to deal with. You may need to start bringing in Sudden Shocks, which I didn't have in this particular deck tech sideboard, but Sudden Shock might be something you want to bring into your sideboard if you are seeing a lot of Heliod decks, because that's going to help you try and break that combo and stop your opponent from gaining infinite life and then dealing infinite damage to you. So that's something you're going to have to keep in mind. Putting in enchantment exiling cards in your sideboard is going to be important. But at the end of the day, when it comes to most combo decks, I'm really confident playing with my Temur Delver decks. So usually a very good matchup. When it comes to aggro, definitely difficult. I'm losing my voice here. Definitely difficult, but not impossible. I am packing a decent amount of removal in the main. You can, for example, remove some Snakeskin Veils and add in more removal, like Flame Slash. It's probably the smart thing to do. Like I said, I went a bit extreme with Snakeskin Veil. I figured I'll protect my creatures more and pump them up, and that's how I'll beat aggro decks, as opposed to removing creatures that are my aggro decks, my aggro opponents are playing, which is, you know, a fine strategy. But if that's not a strategy you feel confident with, if you prefer something that's a bit more straightforward, cut Snakeskin Veils, add in more Flame Slashes and some other removal, and I think aggro matchups will become a bit easier for you. But the way I currently have the formula of this deck, I'm relatively happy. But again, aggro decks have always been some sort of it's always been kind of a 50-50 with Temur Delver decks. It really depends. If they have the nuts and they kind of empty out their hand by turn 3, you know, it can be difficult. But again, you have Force of Negation, you have Mana Leak, you have Sunburn Denial, you also have your sideboard if necessary. You can deal with them, and I wouldn't say they're the worst matchup. 50-50. Big mana decks, yeah, big mana decks. You're heavily leaning on two things essentially: your removal, your permission to get, you know, to stop planeswalkers essentially, and your sideboard to get in Ceremonious Rejection and Blood Moon. That's essentially it. Historically, not the best matchups, so keep that in mind. But again, if you know the decks relatively well, the big mana decks relatively well, if you can anticipate what's coming, you can play your turns intelligently, make sure you mulligan appropriately to have solid hands, and you're good to go. But I wouldn't say this is a swoosh of a matchup. Not Magic decks, degenerate decks, whether they're Dredge or Prison decks, which hopefully you're seeing much less of now with Simian Spirit Guide being banned. Those decks are always a toss-up. I'm hedging against those decks less and less as I build my decks, I find. I'm just going the path of, you know what, if I run into them, then whatever, I do my best, but it is what it is. I'm trying not to devote too much time and energy in dealing with those decks, unless they become main, you know, high-tier decks, and they're taking up a significant percentage of the meta. Then you start metaing against them, but right now, they're mostly in the fringes, so that's how I'm treating them, mostly in the fringes. Control decks, definitely making a rise. I think with control decks, especially with the addition of Veil of Summer from the side, you can deal with them relatively well. You also have Blood Moon. Control decks generally have very greedy mana bases, so Blood Moon can almost certainly win you the game on the spot, or, you know, clinch it in your favor no matter what. So keep that in mind. You have artifact removal for Stormforged Mystic and what it might be bringing out. Definitely not the easiest matchups, but you can definitely go toe-to-toe, especially if you're very comfortable with Temur Delver decks. Then Pteramander Delver wouldn't be too different for you. In mid-range decks, again, mid-range decks, you always go head-to-head with them. Colossus is going to go a very long way. A few other sideboard pieces, including Blood Moon, will go a long way, because again, mid-range decks tend to have, especially the 3-color ones, tend to have very greedy mana bases, so Blood Moon generally preys on those mana bases. Again, like many other Temur Delver decks, I think Pteramander Delver is just fine. It doesn't do necessarily worse. You know, again, you do have to try and fill up your graveyard as quickly as possible to get Pteramander to a 5/5, but, you know, it's going to eat removal as much as your Delver does, and even as much as your Tarmogoyf does. Keep in mind that a lot of these mid-range decks play black, so they have Fatal Push, they have Dreadbore, they have a lot of creature removal that's not damage-based. It's just, you know, they have a few other constraints. So there's the best you can do there is play Snakeskin Veil and Veil of Summer to try and protect your creatures from being removed, and then you play the tempo game and you beat them out. So that's basically it for the matchups. Let me know what you think about this variant of Temur Delver, which I'm calling Temur Pteramander Delver because I'm very creative. But I really had a lot of fun with this deck. I really had a lot of fun with Pteramander. I'm definitely going to revisit Pteramander in some form because, yeah, I think it's an overlooked creature. I understand that it has a weakness to the current meta, but listen, a lot of creatures have a lot of weaknesses to the current meta, and they're still seeing play. So, you know, Tarmogoyf has a lot of weaknesses to the meta for the past 4 years, and yet Tarmogoyf still sees play. So I don't think that's the best excuse for not playing certain creatures and trying them out. But yeah, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought about this deck. You know, what you think about Pteramander. I would love to hear your opinions on it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit notification bell, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, share this video on social media. All of that stuff I just said really, really goes a long way in helping me out, and it's free. It only takes a few seconds for you, but for me, it makes a big difference. It helps out the channel a lot. If you want to go a bit further and join my Patreon, join my ever-growing Patreon community, check out the Patreon link in the description of this video. Check out all the tiers. Choose a tier that makes most sense for you. But most of those tiers, you get some of your money back at the end of every year in the form of magic cards. Yeah, check out the tiers. All the information is on Patreon. Thanks, and have a good one.